You're listening to Menopause Natural Solutions, episode 61, Environmental Health. This is my interview with building biologist Jo Lia. Welcome to Menopause Natural Solutions, your podcast for all things perimenopause, menopause and beyond. Stay tuned as your host, naturopath Jennifer Harrington, explains how to use natural therapies to find your ultimate health and happiness during your transition. Well, guys, let me introduce you to a very dear friend of mine and someone that I've been working together with for many years, Jo Lia, building biologist extraordinaire from No Tox Rocks.
Hi, Jen. Nice to be here.
Hey, hi, Jo. So most of my listeners might not know what a building biologist is. Would you mind filling us in?
Yes, and I'm not surprised. Not too many people seem to know what we are, although I'd say building biology is really picking up in the last few years. So a building biologist basically looks at anything in the indoor environment that can affect your health. So we look at air quality, water quality, allergens, mold, electromagnetic fields, building materials, and to some degree all the products that you're using in the home, because they can be quite toxic as well. So we take all these things into account. We'll often go to somebody's house and assess the home for these toxins and do certain tests and things to find out what's going on in someone's home, and then give them recommendations on how to eliminate or just reduce exposure to these toxins.
What a timely time with COVID going on and everyone spending so much more time in the home that we talk about making sure our home is as healthy as we can make it. It's pretty scary when they talk about the home being the most toxic place.
Well, it is. And your indoor air quality is 2 to 10 times as polluted as outdoor air. And that's just in the average home. Some homes, for example, if you've got a brand new home or you've just done a renovation, there's a very good chance that your home is a lot more than 10 times polluted than the outside, just from the off-gassing of all the materials and things that you've used in that home.
Wow. Well, I invited you on today to talk to us about xenoestrogens. So can you explain to us what xenoestrogens are?
Yes. Basically, there are a lot of chemicals in use today that they mimic our natural hormones of the body. So you'll find them in food, in your dust, in the air, in everything. Everything, basically. A lot of the products, especially that you're putting on your body and hair and things like that. And what these do is they tend to mimic often estrogen. We call them estrogenic most of the time, but they can mimic other hormones. So they can block hormones, your natural hormones, or they can mimic them, and then your body actually thinks that you're reacting to a xenoestrogen, so something that's estrogenic. And as you would know, really, really tiny doses of hormones are all that's needed for our bodies to have a response. And then when we're putting all these fake chemicals into our body, these fake estrogens into our body, we're causing these responses and we don't even realize. A lot of these xenoestrogens are called obesogens now. They've been titled obesogens because they affect, you can have a really big downstream effect. So you can affect one hormone, but as you know, it affects everything really. So if you're having something that affects your thyroid, that can in turn cause weight gain, all sorts of problems like that. So, especially for women as they're going into menopause or through menopause, it's something that you've got to start paying attention to and be really careful of where are you getting exposed to these xenoestrogens and how can you limit your exposure to them.
Can you give us some examples of maybe some major sources of xenoestrogens in the home?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so probably the two most common ones, and most people have probably heard of BPA, bisphenol A. That is a really common one, and that became quite famous probably a decade ago when a lot of mums they found out that BPA was in polycarbonate plastic. So it was in baby bottles. And it's a hormone disruptor. So once they realized this, they started saying, this is not good enough. Get this out of we don't want this in our baby products. And that caused a big, sort of an uproar. There was nobody really came out and said, oh yeah, BPA is dangerous. Well, a few scientists did, but industry itself didn't really say BPA is dangerous. They just took it out of these baby products and a lot of these products because they realised that consumers were no longer going to buy products if they had BPA in them. So now you'll see BPA free, but don't be thinking that anything that you see that is BPA free necessarily means it doesn't contain these chemicals, because they use replacement chemicals like BPS or BPF, which are basically as bad. They just haven't been studied as much yet. So BPA, it was originally used as an estrogen. It was going to be used back in the 1950s, I think, as the pill, the contraceptive pill. And then they realised it had these properties that makes plastic hard. So they found something better to use for the pill, and they decided to use this in plastic. So it's used in all your hard plastics, polycarbonate plastic, things like your Vitamix. It's also in tin can lining. So it's the lining of the food to stop anything acidic or fatty. If you've got an aluminium can and then you haven't got a lining on it, then it's going to, be eaten away by the acidic food, a tin of tomatoes or whatever's in there. So they have to put this lining on it. And it turns out BPA was in this lining, and that's what's in the lining. So you're getting a dose of it every time you eat tin food. If you touch a receipt, when you get the receipts from, the checkout chick, you're touching it and you're absorbing that through your skin as well. And just a point on that, because we're all using hand sanitizers, or we're being asked to use hand sanitizers all the time, antibacterials every time you go into a shop, and then what they do, they've got ingredients in them that actually make you absorb the BPA from your receipts 100 times more absorption. So be really careful. I refuse receipts now. I just do not touch them, especially if you've been using any of those antibacterials or things on your before you go into a store.
Wow, that's new for me. That is so scary.
I know. I just read a study on that a few weeks ago, and that it's a real problem, because we are being made to use these antibacterials, disinfectants all the time, constantly using that, which, probably I do understand why they're wanting us to use those, but, there's triclosan, which is hormone disrupting chemicals in there. There are so many hormone disrupting chemicals in those, and they're not necessarily killing the virus that we think that they're killing. So, soap and water, obviously, keeping your distance from people and all that sort of stuff is very important. But this constant use of these drying, sanitizing antibacterials that we're putting on our hands numerous times a day is probably going to cause bigger problems, and it's upsetting the natural microbiome of our hands, the natural bacteria that we have on skin that keeps us alive, that's part of us, So yeah, there's a lot going on at the moment. I think we have to really start paying attention to where we're getting these chemical exposures and what they're doing.
I like that bit of advice though about the hand washing. It's like, if you have an option, wash your hands over doing the sanitizing.
Yeah, absolutely. Soap and water, and that's what the CDC says. Try and do it for a good 20 seconds and in hot water and all that sort of stuff. It is important, but yeah, just be very careful with the hand sanitizers and the overuse. And if you've got children, be careful with how much they're using as well. Very important.
Okay. Next household source.
Okay, another one is phthalates. And you've probably heard of phthalates too. It's spelled PHTH. It's a hard word to say. But yeah, phthalates are a huge problem. They are found pretty much everywhere in your home. They're in the dust. They're in most of your personal care products, unless it says phthalate free. They're in PVC plastic. They're in it's that new car smell. They off gas from lots of different paints and glues and finishes and stains and things that you might be using in your home. They're in your cleaning chemicals. But yeah, the big one with the phthalates that I think is really important for people of our generation to be avoiding is your personal care products. You really don't want these in your personal care products. Anytime you look on the label of some skincare or shampoo or something, and if it says fragrance at the bottom or perfume, that basically means it could have hundreds of phthalates in it. Usually that's a trade secret, so they don't have to tell you on the ingredient list what's in there, what type of, because it's a trade secret. It gives it its smell, and that's what makes it special and different from the next product. So it's allowed to just put as many phthalates and things in there. And these are really big hormone disruptors. So, the average, I think it's 12 products the average woman uses on her skin. And for a teenage girl, it's about 17 products a day. So that is exposing you to, hundreds of chemicals, hormone disrupting chemicals. And when you think about, I know in chemistry they say the dose that makes the poison, but the thing with endocrine disrupting chemicals is what they're finding out these days is that it's not really about a dose response. It's the really small amounts, particularly can cause changes. And as you know, like a very small amount of hormone is needed for a response. So we are getting constant doses of these hormone disruptors non-stop, all day, every day.
And it's not one.
That's
it's multiple. Right. Like if you've got 12 products and they've got different chemicals in them, it's this cocktail of chemicals that you're swimming in.
That's exactly right. And that's the thing. Even if they do just study one and go, oh, look, it's just such a small amount of BPA that you're getting from this tin food or whatever, it's negligible. But who's looking at the synergistic effect of all of these chemicals, or the cumulative effect once you're putting constant doses of these on top of each other all day, every day. And yes, it has a small half-life of 5 hours, and this gets out of your system, but you are constantly exposed. And then what happens when chemical A is mixed with chemical B? Has anyone studied that?
No.
Yeah. So this is what we're dealing with. Fortunately, there are a lot of safer products out there these days that there are a lot of really good brands that are making changes, trying to do the right thing, and it's so much easier than it was 10 years ago to find non-toxic, organic, good products that you can use.
That's what I'm all about. Like, I'm not about doom and gloom. I'm about, okay, what are the simple things we can implement now that we're aware that we've got a problem? And yes, if we know that we can avoid them, we can buy shampoos, conditioners, face washes, moisturizers, etc., that don't have those toxic ingredients in them, then that's a relatively easy fix.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's so many things you can do. And even let's talk about organophosphate pesticides. So pesticides, just organic food is really important because we are exposed to that. That's where we get our massive dose of pesticides if we're just eating regular produce. Look, these are endocrine disrupting chemicals. They are really, they're also carcinogenic, but they cause big problems for everybody. And there's been studies done that show that if you reduce, and that you don't have to be 100% organic. If you just go 80-90% organic food, within 3 days you have a 90% reduction in the amount of pesticides that are in your urine. So it's literally taking out a massive, massive load of pesticides.
And for the listeners, I will add the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 list that talks about which foods you should be eating and which foods you should be avoiding to the show notes so that you can implement this. Like, I know strawberries, and I know it changes from year to year. Sometimes there's slight fluctuations, but I think strawberries are always in the top two.
Yeah, they are. Berries, you definitely need to be eating berries, all berries. Because, they're so delicious. Of course, pests are going to want to eat them, and then and that's why they have to use more pesticides to kill them. Look, it really is important. Berries, leafy greens, things like that. And also, Jen, maybe you can direct people to the, if they haven't heard about the Environmental Working Group, they also do the Skin Deep website.
Yes. Okay.
Fantastic to help you. Just have a look at the ingredients. You can punch in any product or ingredient from that product into this Skin Deep website, and it will give you a list of, how they rate the chemicals from sort of good to bad and green, yellow, red system. It's very useful.
And for food, I have a good book called The Chemical Maze. And The Chemical Maze is also an app on the phone or a book. So if you're out shopping and you're picking up something that you want to eat and you're looking at the food list, my general rule of thumb is if you can't pronounce the word, don't eat it. Yeah. But if you want to go a step forward, put it in the chemical maze and just see whether you get a green smiley face or whether you get a red upset face or somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, that's another great book. Yeah, that's been around for a long time too, hasn't it, that book?
Yeah, so the book obviously doesn't get updated, it's printed, but the app on the phone does get regularly updated.
Yeah, perfect. And VOCs, I want to talk about VOCs because they are they have a lot of endocrine disrupting properties to them as well. So you'll find VOCs, that stands for volatile organic compounds. And again, that's kind of like the phthalates. So basically, these are chemicals that turn into gas at sort of room temperature. So they off-gassing. When we talk about something off-gassing, you'll know if you've ever walked into a really cheap shoe store or a clothing store, you can just smell. You just get nearly knocked over by that smell of VOCs and all those fake chemicals that they've used to make those products. They're off-gassing into the air. Now, these chemicals you're breathing in all the time, your scented candles, things like that, just be really careful with that. Your air fresheners, they're just loaded with these VOCs and you're breathing them in. So be aware that anything that you're using, a friend was telling me they were on the train the other day and a woman got on the train and she had a can of Glen 20, which in Australia, Glen 20 is this really toxic toilet spray, and she sprayed the whole seat that she was sitting on and the whole area where she was sitting, and she wiped everything that she was, wiped it down before she touched it. And people had to get up and get out of the carriage and go to another carriage because it smelled so bad. So, these chemicals are shocking. They're very, very bad for your health. Please don't be buying scented candles. Don't be buying toilet cleaners. Don't have those plug-in sprays. They're very bad for you. The best fresh air smell is just, of course, you live in a really polluted area, but open your windows and get some fresh air in. That's the best smell.
Sorry, Jo, I need to stop you for a second because your internet cut out for a minute. You said the very best fresh air smell is... and then we lost you.
Okay, so the best air is fresh air. Open your window and let fresh air in. Obviously not if you're living in a polluted area, but getting that outdoor air circulating, that's really going to dilute the VOCs that are in your home. So really important. The problem these days too is a lot of us are living in, a lot of the homes tend to be built almost like a plastic bag. It's energy saving, and to save energy, we have to have tightly sealed houses where no air escapes, and it costs so much less to heat the home and what have you. However, that creates quite a toxic environment. Not only does it increase the humidity in the indoor environment, which can lead to mold, it also keeps all those VOCs and all those, carbon dioxide and all these sorts of things trapped in the indoor environment. So opening windows regularly every single day is really important if you can.
Good advice.
Do you want me to go through some more? What about metals?
Yeah. So I use the HTMA test quite a lot in the clinic, which is a hair test that looks for all of those nasty chemicals. And for my audience, if I can find a source, I do it. If I don't, I refer to Jo. Jo's my go-to woman for anything that I struggle with environmentally wise.
Yes, well, look, I do. I love heavy metals. I mean, I hate them, but I love talking about them and going into them. They're everywhere. Lead is a big one, and lead's also a hormone disruptor. It's more well known, obviously, for reducing IQ and carcinogen, but it is a hormone disruptor, and it's in our makeup. It's in anything that has, particularly red lipsticks, and anything that has colour will generally have levels of lead in it. So you've got to be really careful. Just think about that before you're putting that stuff on, because particularly on your lips or your eyes or somewhere where it's getting a sort of a direct entry into the body, that's when those things can be really dangerous. Lead can also be found in your cookware. There's lots of stories about lead being found in pots and pans and, crystal, things like that. So you've got to be, especially antique ware, be careful if you're using, your antique Corningware or something like that where it's got engraving, patterns on it, because where the patterns are, that's often where you'll find lead.
I talk a lot about lead purely because we are the lead generation. Like, it was in our paint growing up. It was in the petrol when we were running around playing in the outdoor area. And lead loves to store in your bones. And what happens when you get to this stage of life? Your bones start to break down. So what happens? The lead is re-released back into the bloodstream, and all of a sudden we have signs of lead toxicity. So I'm glad you brought up lead.
Well, see, lead is still a really big problem today. And I often wonder, because I know that the limits of what was acceptable have come down a lot. I think it used to be 10 micrograms per litre or something was, in your blood. And then it went down to 5. And I think in the US, they've brought it down to 1 now. I think in Australia, it still might be 5. But at the end of the day, there's no safe level of lead. Now, our generation is going to have a lot more lead, as you said, because of the petrol and the paint. I mean, I remember my dad pulling up at the service station. My sister and I would wind the window down because we loved the smell, Like,
no wonder you got into this field. You poisoned yourself.
I know. And that was while Dad was smoking cigarettes in the car with the windows up while we were driving around, of course. So, I mean, look, we had a very toxic sort of upbringing in a sense, except that there was a few major things in our day that we were exposed to. These days, I think there's so many more hidden chemicals that we have to contend with today that makes it a little bit harder. Yes, we don't deal with so much lead, but as you said, it's in our bones and we're still getting exposures. There's still exposures in the water. There can be if you're not filtering your water, which I think is extremely important because, the microplastics, the BPA, everything. There's so many things in your drinking water that are not regulated and are not filtered out. So a good water filter is extremely important to help with that. And then choosing better products as well, of course. What else can we do? Arsenic. Arsenic's another one. Arsenic's in rice. We used to eat a lot of rice, and we still do. It's kind of, when you've got kids, it's a great filler food. It sort of fills them up a bit. So we do eat quite a bit of rice, but rice is really a major source of arsenic because it absorbs, and it's absorbing it from the water as well. But as it's growing, it's absorbing it from the ground, and arsenic is naturally found in the ground. So, chicken and rice and things like that. And Jen, I know when you've sent me people with high arsenic, I'll often go through with them how much chicken and rice are you eating, and we ask them to stop that for a while and just see if that brings the arsenic levels down. And it often does.
Well, all of the metals, like even like mercury in the seafood, it's such a massive problem. Like, these are, like, you think, okay, I want you to have some good and healthy seafood as a form of protein and a good form of fats, and yet how contaminated are our oceans these days?
I know. Look, that is a worry with the mercury and the PCBs that are in the fish, particularly the bigger fish. So I've sort of moved to eating more of the sardines and but good luck trying to get the rest of the family to eat that. They're not quite into it as much as I am. But look, the mercury and fillings, the old, which we call silver fillings, the amalgams, but they're mercury, they're 50% mercury. So if you still have a whole lot of mercury fillings in your mouth, and if you are not planning on getting pregnant, and you've done all that, it's really a good time to think about getting those fillings removed properly, because they are leaching little bits of mercury constantly. So get them removed by a proper biological dentist, because mercury there's no safe level of mercury as well, and you really want to get that out of your body as much as possible.
And definitely a good dentist, a holistic, biocompatible dentist who's putting in the dam, doing all the right bits and pieces.
Absolutely.
I know for myself, I took a lot of antioxidants before I did mine, some vitamin C and some selenium and zinc, just to as an insurance. But I also got a lot of tin from my amalgams.
Oh, really? Yes, of course. Right. Did you notice that in your hair sample?
I noticed in my hair sample, like, where on earth is this tin coming from? And backtracking, it was the amalgams.
Yeah. And just another point on that, getting those mercury fillings removed. I remember when I was in the United States, now this would have been way back in the late 90s, and just an ordinary dentist sort of said to me, hey, why don't we remove those amalgam fillings? I had 4 amalgam fillings, and he said, we'll put the white fillings in. I said, yeah, sure, go ahead. And now after that, I had a lot of health issues for, I think, about 2 years. Memory problems, really, really severe short-term memory problems, and hair loss. Chunks of hair was just falling out. And I went to an endocrinologist, I went to all sorts of things and could not work out what was going on. Now, this was, what was that, 20, nearly 30 years ago, no, 20 years ago. And I didn't know anything about it. Should have been done properly. But now looking back on that, I really do think it was mercury poisoning at the time. I just think I got a massive dose of mercury and it really messed me up for a while. So be very careful with how you get those mercury fillings taken out.
Yes.
And another source of mercury that people might not realise is those compact fluorescent light bulbs. You know, the energy-saving light bulbs?
Yes.
Yes. Well, they actually have mercury in them. So if you break one of those, you're actually supposed to, call a hazmat team. You're supposed to get somebody from the council to come and clean it up and what have you. Now, I don't know if they're still the same. This is when they first came out about 10 years ago. I remember reading this and thinking, well, that's just crazy that they were coming around to people's homes for free and giving you these energy-saving light bulbs, and they contained mercury. So if you've got any of those, just get rid of those. Stick with the LED light bulbs, a much better option.
That's great advice.
Yeah. I'm not even sure if I don't see them around as often anymore. I'll often see them if I go to somebody's home and they've had them for a long time, and I'll just suggest that they, change them over.
Yeah. With testing, so I do a lot of the GPL tox test, which is looking at environmental chemicals, and the HTMA, the hair test looking for heavy metals. Are those the two you use, or what tests do you do?
No, I only look at environmental testing. So when I go into someone's home, I'll do something like a prism test, for example, which looks at that'll be an air quality test. So it'll tell me what is off-gassing in that person's home, at what levels, where it's coming from, and what they need to do about it, how bad it is and what have you. And then we sort of say, well, could this be causing their symptoms? And then they'll take that information back to somebody like you, their practitioner, and then work out what they can do about it. I'll test, for mold samples. Often we'll take, because molds can produce VOCs, and which are endocrine disruptors as well often. So, it could be a mold problem. It could be just an air quality from VOCs.
Mold is such a big issue. We're going to have you back another day just to talk purely about mold.
Oh yes, mold's what I probably spend most of my time on. Unfortunately, I never wanted to be the mold expert, but it's not something you as a child you go, I want to grow up and work with mold. But it is very important, and it's everywhere, and it does make people extremely sick under some circumstances. So it's a good one to deal with. And obviously the other stuff I deal with is electromagnetic fields. But, the chemicals I think are really important because they're something that you can really take control of yourself in your home. It's about knowing where these things are and reducing your exposure, and it can have huge health benefits for you.
Awesome. So how can women work with you?
Oh, well, if anybody wants to I do a lot of Skype consultations at the moment. And depending on what they want, it could be EMFs we can talk about mold, or we can just go through products. And I find that a lot of people just want help with the products that they're using. They want better options. So we can go through all that sort of stuff, and they can just contact me through my website, which is www.notoxrocks, that's NOTOXROX.com. And they can, of course, follow me on Facebook, NoToxRocks, or on Instagram, which is @NoToxRocks.
Fantastic. All right. Well, you told me before we got started you had a special offer if anyone did want to reach out and work with you.
Yep, I sure do. So if anybody is interested in a Skype consultation, I normally charge $150 for that, but I will do a 1-hour Skype consult for $100. So just mention that this podcast, and we'll do a $100 Skype call or a Zoom with you and get you on track.
Fantastic. That's very generous, and that's in Australian dollars if you're overseas, so it's even better.
Yes, it's even cheaper. Oh, and Jen, I just wanted to say before we go, can I just give people, because I feel like we've just talked about all the bad, how bad everything is, but can I just give maybe a few tips on what people can do that's really going to reduce their exposure to these toxins?
Fantastic. I love it. Go.
Okay, great. First one, we talked about it briefly, but ventilate. It's so important to be opening up your windows and doors daily. Just ventilate, because you're going to dilute those toxins. Another really important one that's so easy, and you can start doing it today, is leave your shoes at the door. Take your shoes off. When you walk in with your shoes in the house, particularly if you've got carpet, you are dragging in all the dust and pesticides, and it's not just the dog poo that you did or didn't stand in, or, it's heavy metals, it's everything. You'll bring that into the house and that settles in the dust. Do not take receipts. So just don't touch receipts. Unless you really need them, don't touch them. Eat mainly organic. That's a really important one. I know it's expensive, but particularly, as Jen said, look at the EWG website to find the clean 15 and the dirty dozen, and base it on that. Limit your canned food. So really try and avoid tin food. Frozen food is better if you can. Throw out all fake air fresheners, anything scented, candles, all plug-ins. Just don't buy those things anymore. You do not need them. Don't store your food in plastic, particularly leftovers. That's a really important one, because that's where you're going to get that leaching from BPA. When it's hot, it's going to leach more. Or if the plastic is deteriorated, it's
and glass containers are available everywhere. They're so easy to find and buy. I can get them in my local supermarket.
Exactly. And never, ever, ever put plastic in the microwave. And don't use non-stick. Anything non-stick, anything that makes your life easier is probably bad for you.
Cling wrap. Get rid of your plastic.
Get rid of cling wrap. Cling wrap. Now there's two things that might cost money. These are probably where the big expense is, but I do think they're really important, and that is filter your water. Get yourself a good water filter, and your vacuum cleaner should have a HEPA filter. So, but you don't have to do those straight away. If you do all those other things, you're really going to be on track to having a healthy home.
What I tell people is to do what you can afford, and if that is okay, it's time to buy a new shampoo, that's when I would buy a chemical-free version. Or if it's time to buy a new dishwashing liquid or a new dishwashing tablet if you have a dishwashing machine, when you need to buy one, spend an extra $1. And one thing that I think is extremely important that we've missed out on is hygiene products. So whether it's tampons, whether it's pads, whether it's urinary incontinence kind of issues, please buy organic.
Yes, I mean, it's you're right, Jen. That's such a intimate area that you've got to be so careful with. So
especially going through the transition, like it can be dry and sensitive and sore. Don't put pesticides on that particular area. It's not going to be good.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really important.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and we can't wait to have you back on and chat mold or anything else you want to talk about.
Yeah, I would love to, Jen. You know me, I've always got something to say.
Well, from all of us here at Menopause Natural Solutions, thank you, and I can't wait to touch base with everyone again soon. Bye for now.
Thank you, Jen. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Menopause Natural Solutions. This podcast contains general information about menopause. It is provided as a guide and it is not intended to replace medical advice. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a rating and review.